This project was focused in discovering the changes that malaria infection causes in the bone marrow. The bone marrow is the tissue where all blood cells are produced, and it is known that survivors of the malaria infection have problems with their blood cell production for life. So we wanted to analyze the bone marrow in depth in a mouse model to decipher which changes happen during this infection and whether we can address that or cure that with a pharmacological treatment.
The goal of this thesis was to investigate how computer vision models, so artificial intelligence specifically for video, how well it could actually recognize actions that are very similar. When humans see this, those actions or those activities look very similar. And so you can only imagine that it even becomes harder for computers to make a distinguishment like this. And when we looked at all the research that was being done in action recognition, there wasn't very much research that was focusing on very specific domains and all actions within that domain.
I studied a particular type of instrument that we commonly find in EU law that is not legally binding, but still has a very specific and important role in how policy works. So these instruments don't say that someone has to do something, but instead they very, very strongly recommend it. So I looked at how these instruments are made and how transparency and participation are accounted for or not accounted for. The outcome of this was that there is more or less no single way of adopting these instruments, which we already assumed going on, but instead it depends on a case-by-case basis on whether or not we as the public can have access to information about who wrote the instruments, who participated, in what way, and so on.
For my research project, I studied criminological, forensic, and criminal law literature to, on the one hand, determine the current state of science, and on the other hand, establish a working definition of what I qualify as an extreme right actor. And after that, I made a selection of 19 criminal cases in the Netherlands of potential violent extreme lone actors. And in these cases, I analyzed if they were suffering from mental disorder, what the judgment of the criminal liability was, and at last, the final verdict and sanctioning of these perpetrators.
My research examined how the European Commission's discourse on migration evolved since the migration crisis of 2015. I applied Habermas' theory of discourse ethics and framing analysis, and I checked whether the discourse was grounded on cultural, security, or economic logic. At the end, I found out that the Commission tends to promote a multifaceted narrative on migration. So it talks about security threats, but also economic motives and humanitarian arguments.
I was engaged in the Towards Prepared Moms study at the Department of Pediatrics at Maastricht University Medical Center. And the Towards Prepared Moms study is a randomized controlled trial evaluating the effect of a personalized lifestyle intervention for women with overweight or obesity prior to conception up to 1 year postpartum. And the Top Mom study collects a lot of data, and I focused on the impact of lifestyle intervention on the retinal microcirculation.
In the brain, the visual cortex contains a map of our surrounding visual space. That means that things that we see as being next to each other in our environment are encoded by neighboring cells in the brain. In my thesis, I looked at how the brain of macaque monkeys processes information after eye movements. I found that brain signals propagate as traveling waves of activity across the maps in visual cortex. The interesting thing is that there are multiple waves present at the same time, each of which travel along different features of these visual maps.
My master thesis was about telemedicine. So when COVID-19 hit the world, telemedicine emerged as a critical technology to provide remote medical care to patients. Because instead of meeting the doctor physically, you could meet the doctor online and therefore also reduce the transmission of COVID-19 among patients, family, and clinicians. And my study's purpose was to identify the factors that influence a patient's intention to use telemedicine offered by their general practitioner through video conferencing. And the outcome showed that performance expectancy was the strongest predictor of behavioral intention, followed by effort expectancy.
Sorry that I couldn't make it. And the only message I could have from here is whenever you set yourself goals, make it purposeful. I think that's the only way to keep up the motivation when it's getting really hard, so you can push forward.